the story with Rahman Maharishi from early morning. I started hearing.
We are now live.
Vocalized silence.
Good afternoon. Assalamu alaikum. Greetings and welcome to an SFH Foundation panel discussion on the subject of the human crisis, bleakness and hope. Today we are privileged to have Shaykh Fadhlalla, Dr. Saadi, Shaykh Saadi, and Dr. Saadi Shaykh, and Dr. Adnan Aladnani joining us for a discussion on this. As you all know, Shaykh Fadhlalla is a Sufi master of self-knowledge and awakening, and has spent the last 40 years of his life teaching and sharing his insights into the human condition and how to transform and transcend ourselves beyond the dross of and the morass of all of the things that humans get caught up in to rise to fulfill our full potential. Shaykh Saadi, Dr. Neil Douglas Klotz, is of course a scholar of Aramaic and Hebrew and is well known to our viewers here. He has a background in hermeneutics and for 8 years has served as the co-chair of the Mysticism Group of the American Academy of Religion and was indeed the first practicing mystic to hold that position. Professor Saadi Shakur teaches at the University of Cape Town. Her specialty is Islamic studies and gender, and her most recent book was Sufi Narratives of Intimacy on ʿArabī, gender and sexuality. Dr. Adnan Aladnani is, of course, again well known to our viewers. He has a background in electrical and engineering and has written a book called Lights of Consciousness, in which he's able to fuse quantum healing, quantum studies with the Sufi cosmology of the self. So today we're going to start with each one of our panelists presenting for 4 or 5 minutes on what their insight is into the current human crisis and what that means to them. And then we will engage in a discussion between us all. Certainly, there is a lot to be concerned about in our lives. I mean, Syria, Yemen, Congo, Tigray, the Rohingyas, the Western Sahara, Sudan, the Uyghurs, Palestine, women, children, minors, so much exploitation and abuse, so much warfare and conflict. Humans are seemingly struggling to survive. But the word actually in English, crisis, was taken from the Latin, from the Greek originally, and it meant to distinguish, to choose, to decide. And Yuval Harari recently said that every crisis is an opportunity. And indeed, perhaps here we are facing one. Not to mention the huge one facing the whole of humanity, which is the COVID-19 crisis. Now, each age has its own difficulties and positive advantages. And in an evolutionary sense, humanity has indeed come a long way, especially considering the size of the world population. But at the same time, there is so much unrest, malaise, anxiety, fear, stress, anger, and abuse. I wonder if we can navigate through all of this existential bleakness to find some rays of hope. So I will start with Shaykh Saadi, please, and I will ask you to start us off today with your presentation, and then we'll continue on through Saadi Shaykh and Dr. Adnan, and then Shaykh Fadhlalla. Thank you.
Thank you, Muna. Thanks to Shaykh Fadhlalla also and the SFH Foundation. Happy to be with you all again. As I was reflecting on this question, I keep returning to the basic, you could say, map of human consciousness that a number of us have been discussing. And in other terms, this is the personal self and the more universal, always connected soul. From a linguistic standpoint, or from the standpoint of the Semitic languages, in Arabic, as you know, this is the nafs and the ruh. However, these words are also the same, or essentially the same, in Jesus's language of Aramaic. He has nafsha and ruha, and even in the Hebrew, nefesh and ruach. However, in this, you could say, in this overall map of humanity and where we are, we're always between these seeming extremes. I say seeming. That is the personal self, our own needs, our own desires, and you could say that part of us which is always connected to its source or to where we came from and where we're going. Now, this model is not exclusive to the Northwest Asian traditions, but also is found in most world spiritual and religious traditions. Neither is it exclusive even to, you could say, religion, in that modern physics talks about a quantum field from which, you could say, individual particles are collapsed, which become the individual self. So we have a field, a 0-point field in which anything and everything is possible beyond time and space, and then we have us here now. However, many people have interpreted this to mean, or the notion that when I view a thing, when I perceive a thing, that is what brings something from the field into the particle. So it is the observer that determines what actually happens. And then they would interpret that to mean, well, then I can create whatever I want. However, they're missing the point that they themselves are a particle and someone is viewing them. And so who's doing the viewing? So this becomes the way that the human nafs, our individual self, has grasped onto even some of these very profound concepts and just uses them to aggrandize the self. So this is very difficult. And people would say, well, you're just talking about metaphysics or religion or psychology even. But it's not about that, because if I don't know if I'm telling myself the truth, if I have nothing to which to refer, it's like me driving around with a GPS that has no connection. I'm just going around in circles. All I'm doing is connecting to myself, and I'm not getting accurate readings. So if I don't know if I'm telling myself the truth, how am I going to know if someone else is telling me the truth? So we have all this misinformation online. And people no longer know when a politician or someone on the internet is telling them the truth. So we have an explosion then of not only real fears, real challenges for humanity, but also a bunch of made-up ones, which are, again, just fabricated for someone's own dream wishes, their own individual nafs desires. And this is sort of where I see a lot of the problem is. If we don't know, if we can't calibrate honestly with ourselves, how are we going to know what to do? There's an innumerable number of problems in the world, so to speak, in the time-space world. So what is mine to do then? Otherwise, I just get lost either in the sense that, okay, I have the solution for everything, and so you're all going to follow my great world order, or I'm so collapsed with all the problems that surround me, as you mentioned, Muna, including climate change, which is at the basis of a lot of these not only conflicts between humans, but between humans and nature. So what am I going to do about it? What am I going to do with it? I just collapse into myself and pull the duvet over my head. So I'll leave it at that. I hope that's enough problems for you.
It's a problem where you're already showing us indicating an out as well. Thank you. Well, Dr. Saadi Shaykh, please, would you like to follow on?
Thank you, Muna. Assalamu alaikum, and thank you for having me on this platform. What I would like to focus on in a little bit more of the conditioned consciousness in terms of crisis is the question of gender injustice, because in my view, if we're inattentive to gender injustice in our community, we are going to be neglecting some of the strongest signs of crisis in our time. So currently, if we look at the COVID pandemic and we see how children and women have been affected by what the UN has actually called the shadow pandemic, which is an increased violence in homes when children and women are in lockdown with abuse men and have no escape from such abuse, we actually are seeing some kind of, set of symptoms writ large on the world stage. In South Africa, just the government GBV, gender-based violence and femicide command recorded more than 120,000 victims in the first 3 weeks of lockdown last year. within 6 weeks of lockdown, the domestic violence call center in Shwani was receiving 500 to 1,000 calls a day. Now, I am simply looking at this for us to be able to, as the Quran asks us, to read the signs in the horizon. And I think if we are inattentive to these signs, we're actually going to be missing and losing an opportunity to address something really important in terms of mediation between that kind of consciousness of transformation and spiritual resonance with the kind of challenges of the here and now. And these issues of violence against women are not simply isolated cases of dysfunctional men, as some of us would like to believe, but it's symptomatic of a deeper and a far more pervasive social problem. Abuse, violence, and rape are the results of systems of power and social structures that privilege men and give men authority over women in all kinds of ways. So we cannot think of this as a problem out there. We're not separate from the people and the men and the things that are taking place in our society. Our beings are intimately connected with each life around us in ways that are both subtle and evident. And while it might be easier for some of us to label men who violate, abuse, rape, and even murder women as monsters, as evil people, people who are different from us, this is not helpful. Human beings who perpetrate such acts of violence have not grown up in isolation. They've been formed within our families and our communities, and we have failed them. We have not provided sufficient protection against men turning into rapists and abusers and murderers. We've not provided the resources for proper models of masculinity and respectful egalitarian relationships. And we are being called to bear witness to the failure of our own models or our own inabilities to create effective and wholesome alternatives. And I'm not for a minute discounting men's individual responsibility for their acts. We as human beings, as we know, are each finely balanced between the determining structures of our society and the sets of choices we are free to make as human beings. And as a community, we have to do our bit in whatever ways are open to each of us in our local context to contribute to a society that nourishes human beings who see each other as carriers of the divine presence. So there's another related point that I want to make here. The importance of treating women with dignity and respect is not simply a gendered issue. It's a question of our very humanity being at stake. And here I'm not simply speaking about resisting violence. I'm talking about the full range of individual behaviors, social and communal norms that facilitate the health and the well-being of women, but also other peoples that are less powerful or stigmatized in our society, whether these are foreigners, refugees, queer people, or children. The humanity of men and those in powerful locations is conditional on the way they treat those that are less powerful. So I think one of the issues that we need to attend to is how we figure out in our personal and in our communal lives, how we promote the refinement of our behavior, our being, and our social action. And it requires a kind of critical reassessment of the norms and the customs we take for granted. We need to ask ourselves, how is it that we teach our children, our nieces, our nephews, our daughters, and our sons, our students, ways of being, men and women? In our most intimate relationships with our partners, how nurturing are we? How caring and nurturing are we of any group of people that are less powerful than us, whether we're a man or a woman? How do young men speak amongst themselves about sexual conquest as proof of masculinity? And how do we transform those kinds of conversations? Which ways do we belittle women by the stereotypes we perpetuate or we just silent about? And how often do straight people snigger at jokes that have to do with same-sex relationships? What kinds of things do we overlook? Which behaviors amongst powerful men do we avert our gaze from? Which battles do we shy away from but that need to be waged? So I would suggest that gendered violence is, among other things, the result of a deficit in our moral capacities and our actual lived realities to live with a vision and a way of being human based on human dignity and social justice. And as I ask these questions, I remember that our Prophet ﷺ came both as a warner and as a bringer of good tidings. And in case you think that I'm only doing the former and not the latter, let me just say that, again, I want to reiterate the point that a time of crisis is also a time of opportunity. And as Shaykh Saadi has pointed out, the state of the planet right now has brought an urgent awareness to the ways in which we have been destructive. And it's the same logic of domination where you have men that dominate women. Many scholars have argued that it's that very same logic of domination, exploitation, and abuse towards the earth that's created our current crisis. And so when we see all of this evidence of crisis, instead of kind of shutting down into ourselves in the way that Shaykh Saadi mentioned about our own kind of impotence in this kind of situation, the time now is for us to be hurled back to the moment when the angels asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, why would Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala create the human being who would shed blood? And our Creator, our beloved Lord, mentioned or said or responded by saying that Allah knew what they did not know. And so maybe this is the time to figure out that part of the unknowing that the angels did not have, and how we bring that into manifestation, how we bring the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has pointed out that Allah's rahmah precedes or overcomes Allah's wrath, that the Jamal is in fact the kind of very matrix of our self-refinement, so that we only work in the more Jalali mode in the world once we've calibrated in the Jamal. So let me just start by some of those kind of opening reflections. Thank you.
Well, that's an extremely broad and deep view. Thank you very much. Both of you have touched on different aspects of, in a sense, the moral issue that underlies our general human crisis. But before we continue, I'd like to invite Dr. Adnan Aladnani to add his comments, and then Shaykh Fadhlalla's, and then we will pick up on all of your own comments, inshallah, amongst you all. Thank you. Adnan?
Salam to everybody. Well, the good thing is that they've said most of the things that so there's very little. I'll try to find something to say. Well, it all goes back to the question of the human condition. I mean, if you look at it historically in time, it's in a sense it's a perpetual crisis. State of crisis, whether externally we're the struggle for survival, or internally the struggle for fulfillment or happiness, or seems that it's an ongoing thing. And so although the term of evolution, of development, has kind of reduced the concern in a sense for survival aspect, but the inner crisis remains even more. And what we see is what had evolved is that, I mean, we're speaking with Shaykh Fadhlalla, is that the difference between being intelligent and being clever. There's a vast difference here. Certainly, we will become more clever and clever, as evidence from effectively the issue of survival. We are less have concern of that because of our advancement in knowledge and technology, and everything is almost readily available. Even when dealing with a pandemic, like a pandemic thing, even is even considered a miracle in this day and age that there's a vaccine in less than a year or something like that might help in the long run. But again, the difference between cleverness and intelligence, what we see is that cleverness applies to the world of duality, reason and aql, and finding proof and evidence and all that. However, intelligence goes deeper than that. What unifies all this? What is the reference to the world of relativity and duality? Right. Without that, we are always in a state of shifting sands, in a way, writing on the water. So without that, the crisis remains. So in a sense, we see that now with the pandemic, almost a lot of little, as mentioned, whether it is at the gender, social level, global level, there's something that's a crisis that we don't know what to do with that in the dualistic sense. So because there is no real reference as Shaykh Fadhlalla, that in the world of duality and hope, everything is complementary. Both the hope and the bleakness go together. In the sense, as I said, cleverness, that illusion of independence, and that we can do anything, we can think everything out, and we can do anything, is itself a veil over the intelligent side of us that refers to the timeless, in the sense, the spiritual. Without that reference, we are just moving into another, from one crisis to the other. What we had in the past year is unprecedented because, in a sense, it was global, and it was, as in the past, it was everything. It was localized, and now it's global. And so, where's the way out? Where's the solution? We're all in the same thing. So there's hope in that, as in nobody's better than other. So again, here is that aspect of all our questions, all our questioning is fine. It's all a part of our seeking that fulfillment or seeking self. However, that it remains in the domain of reasoning. Is that okay? Give me the next solution, the next solution, the next. But again, in the world of duality, both crisis and the solution, crisis and hope, all go together. You're just moving the goalposts in a sense. So there are more things. There is no. It's all shifting all the time. Where's the referencing? I mean, in the terms of science and cosmology, always, in a sense, makes sense, or it always has a reference. I mean, we don't know that. We don't have an awareness of that. There's always a reference. Although the sciences are in the world of relativity, that's why we have equations, we have balance, we have that. But again, there is a reference always to something that isn't in time and space. So when is the time that we can have it for ourselves? The human asks themselves their own condition. Who am I? What am I doing here? If who am I remains at, the answer is at, and what to do, everybody asks what to do, what is it? But that question comes from my dualistic aspect. So I'm still seeking a dualistic solution, which will never work, because it's again shifting things. There is no reference to something that is not non-dual or non-space-time. Of course, that can only be within us, because that's where the source of real intelligence is. Otherwise, I mean, we're trying to find it somewhere else, then we are missing the point. So that's fundamentally is the real crisis, is who we are, and from then the real question should come up. If I know who I truly am, or at least if I'm no one, then what is the real question there? I'll keep it at that for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sadia. Sorry, I pressed the mute button, but it didn't register. Thank you, Adnan, for your comments there, taking us back to the macro level. Shaykh Fadhlalla, I invite you now to share with us your comments, and you may wish in your comments to comment on what has been said before, and then we'll continue into discussion, inshallah. Bismillah.
Bismillah. I see the situation always as a balance between two opposites which meet in perfect balance in the middle. So the global crisis now is to be celebrated, in that it's no longer localized, it's not regionalized, it's not subject to a religion or to a tribe or to a nation. It is, all of us are feeling it. Climate change, as Shaykh Saadi mentioned, we are afflicted in every way you look at it. We are insecure, no matter how much wealth, power, or other things we have. We know that time is passing. We don't know what the nature of death is. So confusion at so many levels. I think this is celebratory. in that we now have to ask the key question, who am I? The answer would be certainly that I do experience the outer world according to my inner state. So am I the inner state only? But also I experience the outer. I have senses. I hear, I see, I touch, I smell, I taste, and so on. So it will come out clearly that I too represent duality, emerging from unity, returning to duality. And the Quran says you are struggling towards that unity, towards your Lord, struggling. So I am both a light that is cosmic, that is not confined or defined, and it has within it the touch of everything exists in the whole cosmos, and manifested in this short-term cycle of birth and death, and an individuated, definable, in a sense, particle. A particle emerging from the quantum field of energy, visualizing, understanding, interacting with all kinds of other fields on this earth, and returning. So the whole thing is preparation for graceful return. We talk about good relationship, we talk about fairness, justice, whether it is gender or religious or any other. What about justice towards your own soul? Have you been in reference to it? Have you been correct with your courtesy to that which is eternal within you? And you're all the time bemoaning the outer appearances, and they didn't, respect you enough. They didn't honor you enough. But did you honor your own soul? Did you honor your own soul? Did you honor life as it appears in the mosquito or in the dog or the human being? Do you truly honor them? Do you truly see them as essentially as the sameness? So not until you find that all plurality, duality, multiplicities, all of them have inherently the sameness. Otherwise, we go back to what Dr. Adnan said, is that you think, oh, the others. Most people think the others are stupid. But equally, most people think they are the most clever. Who is the I? It is your soul, your innermost source of life. That is divine, that is sacred, that is eternal, that is not bound to any conditionality. Whereas its shadow, the so-called I, is bound to all kinds of, if you like, strings, most of which also can fall into the network of the divine attributes. We all love power, intelligence, knowledge, ability, ever living, all of that. These are divine, if you like, attributes. We carry those within us. So in actual fact, a soul has the potential of carrying few, more, or most of divine attributes, as the case of the human soul. So there can't be any greater gift than that. But because of the shadow and the nafs wants to emulate this, and it can't because it's just a moving shadow, so it starts accumulating, accusing, ending up doing what we are doing in this world of a mess, of having thousands of nuclear warheads whose maintenance is in the billions of dollars a year, and they will be obsolete before we know. And we're clever, as Adnan was saying, cleverness is a reflection of spiritual stupidity, but not in the normal sense. No, he's very intelligent, and on and on and on and on. Humanity has to be acknowledged, but for it not to lead me, my innermost is the source of my life, and that is where leadership can be sought. Humanity requires justice, requires kindness, requires honesty, preferring others to me so that I have an excuse to serve. Through service and love and giving, I may get out of my lower self, my animal self, towards the higher self, towards the nur that is within me. The entire story of human journey is to come out of the numerous levels of darknesses, fears, anxieties, and sorrow into the light that is timeless, boundless in its perfection and beauty. So if we don't do that collectively, we suffer, as we are doing now. So on the one hand, we have to weep and really commiserate with each other. And on the other hand, we should celebrate that we are collectively, the entire universe is now being choked with the stupidity of our idiotic behavior and way of conduct.
Thank you, Shaykh Fadhlalla. You have brought us to a midway point between bleakness, despair, and hope, and dare I say, optimism. We are being given an invitation, it seems. It is an opportunity, as each one of you have mentioned. But I wonder, how does this template of Shaykh Saadi you referred to, if you don't calibrate with the higher self, then what is it that what is guiding you? I mean, if we don't calibrate ourselves, how is it, if there is no template for this across the board, across the whole of humanity, how does that work? How can that possibly happen? I mean, religions came into being, moral codes came into being in order to guide people to preserve themselves, save themselves, let themselves flourish. And yet we find that we have not been good stewards of the planet, of humanity, of the more vulnerable in our populations. And the current COVID crisis has highlighted that in its extremes. So how do we go from an overarching template down to the kind of the grassroots level, to the things that Dr. Saadi Shaykh was talking about? The incredible, when you're looking at the statistics of what's been happening to the most vulnerable in our population, how do we connect it? How do we bridge this?
It's already bridged. I have to walk on that bridge. If it touches me, I have to respond, because humanity is one. Life is one. The source of everything emanates from the one and returns back to the one. It's at the same time and in no time. So if it touches me, I have to respond. If it doesn't touch me, I say this is part of the upbringing of these children in a messy, if you like, kindergarten. Fine. And if it doesn't touch me, it doesn't touch me. That's all. So I will remain, if you like, in great vocalized silence. That's fine. Nothing wrong with it. But if you are given that energy because it's touched you as a child or as somebody, say it. Nothing wrong with that. Therefore, freedom of speech is essential, is vital, is part of the respect, if you like, and honor of the sacred within us. Until such time, most people realize this fellow is screaming and speaking and so on, talking a lot of nonsense, and they turn away. It's part of the learning curve. We are in this eternally self-unfolding, if you like, teaching situation, until you move from specific knowledges into the source of knowledge. Then you become redundant like me. You say it's already there. So it's not that helpful. Other people want to have a formula to get out of the loop of their own stupid head. So, and if you can help them, help them. The whole business is about reducing suffering. But sometimes suffering is like a fever. It has to reach a pitch until it burns itself out. Or you leave your body and liberate it. Hallelujah, how wonderful, you died. You celebrate. The whole thing is celebratory. It depends on the level of your inner state, you know. You may feel sorry for this and that, and for animals and so on, and leave your will and your whatever money you had for the donkeys, suffering donkeys of Minos or whatever. Nothing wrong with that. It's wonderful. But these are all expressions emanating from a source that contains within it the entire cosmic possibilities. And that is the state of your ruh. That's why it is a treasure beyond measure. But we're all the time running around collecting silly little pebbles, not realizing that all the gems, mines are already encapsulated within your own soul. If you have all the gold in the world, what are you going to do with it? You want to keep it in a safe place. Otherwise, why not leave it where it is? Same thing with other things. But we're silly. We are evolving, and very rapidly, I might add, from being a very stupid, vulgar, and a very warlike animal to being now we're all diplomatic, we're nice, the honorable gentlemen. You like to give them a kick. And so we've become, at least, we've evolved a great deal in the last few hundred years in the outer sense. And that will only lead to the inner. start with the outer, with ثيابك فطهر. Make sure you're all right, clean, and so on. And it moves on and on into the inner until you find the inner was exactly as it was in the outer, and there is none other than the one. And then you are restful then. Then you are less harmful than others. That's all. Then you ask, oh Allah, forgive me, I'm taking oxygen from the air. I have to eat also. Ask the plant to be excused when you're cutting it because you're munching on, and so on. And then you really live joyfully. Then you are truly realizing that you are truly in the garden. And the absolute garden is in you. That's why the outer garden comes to match your inner garden. And then you are as good as it comes. And that's about all. You live longer, you live shorter, you know, life is forever. And your life is not separate from life itself. So what's the problem? That's all.
I'd like to invite the other panelists to come in here. Maybe Sadia, would you like to see in the evolution of your own thoughts during the process of this gathering here, the connection between the global and the local?
Thank you, Mona. Actually, I would like to address a question because I think that rightly Shaykh Saadi, Adnan, and Sheikhna have pointed that, in fact, you cannot address the conditions of the world without that calibration to the higher. I mean, I like the idea of a GPS without connection. I think that's quite an apt way of thinking about it. And so I guess my question to any or all of the speakers is, what would you diagnose as the roadblock to that calibration, the kind of the most significant roadblock at this point? Sheikhna?
Me. I am the roadblock.
He's saying me, the person, the individual is the roadblock.
I am the block.
We must move ourselves out of the way then, yes? This is what we're often told.
Giving others was, the poor and the miserable and the needy are created for you to get rid of you. So,
if I could jump in here,
please.
I agree, of course. It may help to look at this in, again, the long view of things, because from what I can tell, the human nafs, our individual self, now is not what it was. 10, 20, 100,000 years ago, my individual I, my me, was much more embedded in nature, and I had less of a self, less of an I. I still had a nafs, I still had a nefesh, but it was so much thinner than it is now. It was so much more connected with my tribe, with nature around me, all these things. And then the evolution of the human nafs, of the I, proceeds. That means human consciousness itself evolves or devolves at the same time. It's a how wonderful, how terrible at the same time. We become more individuated from nature, from each other. First, we're embedded in our tribe. Okay, then agriculture comes along and we stay in one place. So we're embedded in our village. Okay, then there are different levels. Okay, some people own more, some people acquire more. Gradually, slowly, over thousands of years, the I, the human I, becomes more I. And of course, at the same time, nature becomes more and more objectified, if you will. And so I begin to treat nature not as part of me, but as an object to be manipulated. And here's where technology arises, that technology arises because the human individual self has become so individually creative that we can now, as Dr. Adnan says, we can now become so clever that we can manipulate nature with technology, and on and on and on, if I can borrow from Shaykh Fadhlalla. Now all of that creates things that we would agree have helped humanity, and also things that have put us in the spot, in the predicament that we are now. So it's both hopeful and bleak at the same time. The question is, what do we do with this highly individuated, selfie nafs that we have at this point? Can we willingly put such an animal, such an individual selfie animal in service to the greater good on the human level, you could say on the time-space level, and can we willingly recalibrate in time so that we don't, burn the whole house down before we have a chance to remodel it? That's sort of, for me, the question. Time is, of course, a feature of all of this, in the sense that, again, 2, 3, 4, 5,000 years ago, we didn't have minutes and seconds, and people didn't calibrate time in like these little bundles, which is equivalent to the way the individual self evolved. So now we've sliced and diced time into all these small seconds, nanoseconds. Time has become another commodity. We buy and sell time. Before, we saw time as the cycle of the seasons, the cycle of the day and night. Hence, we have the salat and all the wonderful prayers that celebrate the passing of the day, and the festivals that celebrate the passing of the seasons. So we had this sense of time as a rhythm, rather than time as a commodity. So, as I say now, time is money. And that tells you how virtual a world we've come to live in, but it's all snuck up on us until now it's in our face. And the results of all this, okay, hopefully we're able to review this individually and collectively in our collective nafs and make some substantial changes so that we actually have time in the sense of this long cycles and seasons to get where we need to go with Allah's rahmah.
Yeah, thank you, Shaykh Saadi. Adnan?
What do I do about me, huh? Well, again, it's, as Shaykh Fadhlalla, is that, say, the me. What is the nature of the me? Do I understand what me is? If I am the block, me and the block, the more I understand this me, this self, as a pattern, a conditioned pattern that is, it is a combination of birth situation and the timeline that my biography is, then the more I understand that truly there is only one nafs. So all our me's are actually one nafs that has been patterned into different pathways. So if I truly recognize that it's all me, there is only one me that has messed up, and my individual self has misappropriated a universal, really, perfection. That's only the best way you can say about it. Mm. So the more that, if there is only one self, one divine origin, so then each individual me becomes really a place where all of these divine attributes are manifesting. So I just remembered is that we say, Inna lillah wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Everybody says that, but how many people understand that really? Okay, what does that mean? It's that if it means Inna lillah, we belong to Allah, and to Him we return. So if we really understand that, that means that whatever I have is not me, does not belong to me. The best I can do is, my path is at-takhalluq bi akhlaqillah, to take on the attributes of God, of Allah. That means I become an opportunity to manifest. So my generosity is not my generosity. I'm a conduit, let's say, best, I don't know, way to say it, to be to display to the divine generosity in a localized sense, as Shaykh Saadi mentioned. What about Rahman and Rahim? What does it mean? What does Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim mean? So ar-Rahman is that universal, absolute thing that has become localized into Rahimiyya of each individual person. Can I do that? As Dr. Shaykh mentioned, is that as an individual, can I, but how can I do that if the me is too selfish, too self-centered? It's a block. So that's where the calibration comes in, is in at each moment, at each, I am aware that whatever is coming through me or everybody, every nafs is not me, it belongs to Allah. Then how can I not be, Jamali in the sense of my action, if I call it. It's in truth, there is only one action. I am a means of the universal action to manifest. I'm not the actor. I am. So that's how the divinity and humanity, in a sense, meet, where there's only really divinity, and humanity is what's the particle that appears, that makes its appearance. So that is where how do I calibrate that, or how? It's not even me. I don't want to say me, because that is where things go wrong. We ask from a position of me as if I belong to myself. No, inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. It always goes back to that. If I have that, that dhikr, we mentioned before, dhikr and reason are two different domains. Just reading from Hakim Sanai, says, we tried to reason our way to God and we failed. The moment we gave up, there is no obstacle. There was never obstacle. There's only perfection. The obstacle is the so-called me misappropriating the position of the ruh, as Shaykh Fadhlalla mentioned.
Shaykh Fadhlalla, did you want to come in?
Going back to Dr. Saadiya's thing, the block, once you go to the side of it, once you transcend it a bit, then there is a flow. And flow is life. Most people are blocked in their local, small, animal, self-preserving, lower self or ego or any other name you want to give. Once you flow, then there is the natural arc of rise in consciousness. So you begin to move from the local me, from the so-called me, from the childish identifying, there's only me, I love only me, to wider and wider and higher in consciousness. So you move from the lower self to the higher self, which is your soul. So the whole thing is a flow from this silly identity which can't last, which is a dungeon, to the reality of the cosmic presence, of the divine presence. There is only the divine presence. So as that movement, so I must remove my mindset, which may have given me for a second or a little while some pseudo security. There is no security in that. There is no security in the animal side. The moment it's born, it's dying. There is only transcendence of that which is within space and time to our true original nature, which is ever present now, which is timeless, boundless, eternal. That's the nature of your ruh. And that's why Dr. Adnan was saying, take on the qualities, or the Quran also says the color, sibghat Allah, which all of those attributes. Those attributes are radiating from the soul, from your own spirit. They're radiating. And they've created this amazing web to capture humanity. We're all caught in that web. All of the, if you like, materials of it are these attributes. The ever generous, the everlasting, the ever present, the ever knowing, and. This is emanating from your own ruh. This is your Rabb inside. وَإِلَىٰ رَبِّكَ. So it's already there, but because I'm so occupied with the illusion that I am sustaining myself, I have to survive. Don't survive. Don't survive. Stop it. You'll be amazed. Some other idiot will come and they say, we had too much food, please take it. Really, it's like that. It's like me thinking that I'm such a generous fellow, gave a tip to a porter, which was more than his monthly wage, expecting now the fellow to faint from this silly little gift. And he just looked at me like this and returned it back to me. He said, no, thank you, I don't want it. So these were my teachers, you know. So the rest were all nominal sheikhs and this and that. But truly, you know, who are you? You're lucky if you find somebody who you can give something to and they thank you. Really, that's it. And be ashamed when you are thanked, because who are they thanking? They think it is you with the head, with the skin, with this. There is no such thing. It's changing every instant. كل يوم هو في شأن. But your ruh is ever constant, so is his ruh and her ruh. Once you are in reverence of life as it manifests, then hope begins. Otherwise, it will be more and more bleak, as we have all ended collectively. We're getting to the Mars. We're positioning ourselves to come and investigate a stupid little crater somewhere in Mars, and we have misery around us galore, and we're calculating and having haggles and thousands of functionaries sitting there with their numbers. You know, you have overcome over your quota, on and on and on and on. Shameless. We have no shame. We really, that's how it is. It's gone beyond even being sad about it or weeping about it. I can only celebrate it. I said, they have done such a good job in hanging them, stringing themselves, ourselves, all of us. That's it. So it's a celebratory, really.
Celebratory in the sense of the potential for hope and transformation. Otherwise, it's a tragicomedy.
No, there is no you, there is no such thing. This whole thing on Earth is tiny, insignificant. One little planet out of zillions, out of billions of galaxies. What are we talking about? And here we're, you know, silly. We're really, and we think we are clever, and we dress up all of these things, and we put on nice clothes and ties, and it's silly. It's ludicrous. The most absurd thing we are doing is, if you watch it with a little bit of a fresh eye.
But this absurdity causes so much suffering. And Saadia, your question was addressing, you know, that as well. I wonder, having posed your question to the panel, what is your response to their responses?
May there be more. Because anything will end. What is the end of suffering? You die. It's not a big deal. Now you wake up to your own reality. The body has left you. The mind has left you. Now you are truly as you were, a soul. Congratulations.
Saadia?
I find that, I mean, all of this is beautiful, and these insights are incredibly luminous. The reality is that if people knew that this is the roadblock, they would transcend it. So the question is, we need technologies for recognition. It's wonderful to posit our unconditioned, blissful consciousness, the higher calibration. SubhanAllah, may we reach that state. But if the masses of humanity had access to that, we would not be in the situation we're in. So I think at a very basic level, we've got to get a lot more pragmatic about technologies of those kinds of movements and those kinds of awareness. And I think that, you know, so if we talk about divine attributes, SubhanAllah, yes, absolutely, we are supposed to take on the colors of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You know, if I have to just bring it at a practical level, if we look at patriarchy, it's men assuming this attribute of strength with no calibration of anything else. So yes, of course, we can have these maps and these cosmologies and these beautiful understandings, but the pragmatics of how we calibrate in real terms, that we come up against particular notions of ourselves and mechanisms to overcome that, I think is the real challenge. So I'm in complete agreement with these beautiful mappings and these calibrations. And absolutely, we can't see out of duality through duality. Adnan really beautifully made that point. But now we need technologies. And I think that we need to be able to bring those technologies into conversation with the current state of challenge that we have. May we all imbibe all of those beautiful qualities, but part of it is recognizing how we calibrate these very different things in ways that that we can step aside and view ourselves, that we're not so enmeshed with our own ego that we cannot even make those recognitions. So I think there's a kind of pragmatic challenge that I'm always wanting. Our beautiful Shaykh lives in a blissful state. The rest of us need some kind of portal to be able to access that. And sometimes it's more these pragmatic things that I think we need a little bit more elaboration on, or technologies, pragmatic things.
مرج البحرين يلتقيان بينهما برزخ لا يبغيان. There is outer technology that you are referring to, and that is what is strangling us. And there is inner technology, which begins if you enter your true inner silence. No mind, no thought, no movement. It is completely and utterly, in the outer sense of your neurons, non-existent. If you can tap that, then you are at the door of inner technology. That will tell you also when to say, when not to say, when to leave the body, whenever to die, whenever, what. That is your guide. Outer technology is a model or a representative sample of inner technology. All of our outer life on this earth is a small representation of what is in the inner. Our love to have a friend, to have somebody whom we trust. Your soul is the most trustworthy thing ever. So that's what, and on and on and on. So all of what we aspire in the outer world are small little representations of your inner vastness of truth.
Well, I would like to bring our discussion here to a close by turning to Shaykh Saadi.
I would say the hopeful features of what we see are, again, only viewed in the long run. In that, let's say 100 years ago, or a little more than 100 years ago, what Western culture calls psychology arises to try to heal the nafs a bit, or try to make it more integrated in a moral or in an ethical sense into society. And we see other things arise like that even without any religious or spiritual map. Emotional intelligence, all sorts of conflict resolution, all these things that are used in a very healthy way in social activism. All of these are people's, you could say, inner nature, their original nature, their fitra, as the Quran calls it, arising to try to bring things into balance. The younger generation immersing themselves particularly in climate change and concern for the earth. So there is a rising within humanity, but not as one single movement, all sorts of different movements more towards balance. And that is what I would see as a more helpful trend that bridges, these larger range maps with the problems, the challenges that confront us today.
Brilliant.
Thank you very much, Shaykh Saadi. Would anybody of the panelists like to offer a last comment here or interpolation? No? Shaykh Fadhlalla?
In my own life, I found the more frequently I was able to enter into true silence, body, mind, and everything. The more frequently I experienced that, the more I felt I am in this world, enjoying everything, but nothing afflicts me. In this world, not of this world. As Shaykh Saadi calls it, calibration is self-soul. From myself, which is evolving, developing, has wants, desires, love, hate, whatever, to that which is divine and within me. The more often I calibrate, the less I have fears, anxieties, sorrows, guilt, or anything. The more I am present. The more you are present, the more you are actually living in perpetuity. That's all what that is really a simple. And if you like, people nowadays from all over the world picking bits and pieces of that, from the Buddhistic traditions, from the Hindu, from Sufi, whatever. All what you need is to enter into that complete silence by will and by divine grace that allows that will to happen. That's all what I know.
Thank you, Shaykh Fadhlalla, and thank you to each one of you who have reflected so deeply and profoundly and honestly about these issues. We seem to have come to a sort of convergence of understanding the need for this calibration between the self and the soul. And I too join with Sadia Sheikh's sort of dua or prayer for finding ways to break that down to the grassroots level without the heavy-handedness of a police state or it being imposed from the outside, but coming from within. We can be ever hopeful that inner self-transformation leads to social transformation as well. And in the end, we are only accountable, each one of us, for our own actions. We've come alone, we leave alone. If we have had roles in life with social and political responsibility, we are accountable to society, and we must indeed pay that account. But ultimately, we're accountable, each one of us, to our creator, to our origin. And that is if we are all sincere and fully occupied 100% in that passionately, then our outer will also improve. And then we will hopefully then bypass the need for reform and the revitalization, for example, amongst Muslims. You know, how can you restructure the patriarchal infrastructure of the very epistemology of the way we think about self-soul, about creation, about man in creation, man's duty towards society, man's duty towards God, to family, etc., etc. So I hope and pray that these maps, these macro spiritual maps, will become more and more available on micro levels, so that people, it should be filtered on through local levels, and know how we can best behave in our own communities and address the needs that we have in our own communities. So inshallah, this crisis, or the crises that will face us all, are nothing but opportunities, and I hope that we can all be instrumental in some way of facilitating the answers. Thank you so much for opening these beautiful pathways.
Thank you, Adnan. Thank you, Adnan.
Thank you, Adnan. Thank you, Shaykh Saadi. Thank you, Dr. Saadi Shaykh. Thank you, Shaykh Fadhlalla.
Thank you, Muna.
On behalf of the Shaykh Fadhlalla Haeri Foundation, thank you all for joining us. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh.